History books are filled with grand battles, famous generals, and dates that decided the fate of nations. We study these names in classrooms, see them carved into monuments, and remember them as pivotal moments. But there are other battles, quiet ones, that barely earn a footnote in those same books. No parades were held for them, no movies were made. And yet for the men who fought and died there, those days never truly ended. This is the story of one such battle. It took place in a narrow, forgotten valley, far from any capital city or famous front. The maps barely even bothered to mark its location. The terrain itself was an enemy-thick mud that clung to your boots, dense fog that swallowed every sound, and rolling hills that made you feel completely isolated. Orders from headquarters came late, supplies were scarce, and the promise of reinforcements felt like a distant dream. To the strategists looking at the big picture, this was a minor engagement, a small dot on a massive map. But to the soldiers on the ground, it was the entire world. They were just young men. Some had lied about their age, eager to enlist and serve. Others had left behind families, promising they would return home soon. When they first arrived in that valley, they didn't even know its name. All they knew was their order: hold this ground, no matter the cost. The enemy attacked before dawn, their advance hidden by the thick morning fog. The sudden crack of gunfire shattered the silence, and in an instant, chaos erupted. Radios failed, cutting them off from command. Runners sent with messages got lost in the disorienting landscape. Units became mixed up, and men found themselves fighting side by side with soldiers they'd never met before. There was no clear front line, just a swirling mess of smoke, confusion, and the desperate shouts of warnings. Hours bled into days. They fought without sleep, without proper food, and at times without any hope. Every bullet was counted carefully. Bandages were reused until they were soaked through. When the medics ran out of morphine to ease the pain of the wounded, they simply held their hands and offered what comfort they could. Every hill was taken, lost, and then taken again. Each meter of ground was paid for in blood. By the third day, the valley was unrecognizable. The trees were shredded into splinters, and the earth was torn open by explosions. The fog would occasionally lift, but only long enough for the soldiers to see the devastating cost of their stand. And still they held on. They didn't do it because the battle was strategically important on paper. Most of them had no idea if it was. They held on because the man fighting next to them mattered, because retreat meant leaving a friend behind. They held on because they believed that somewhere, far away, their stand was protecting people who slept peacefully, completely unaware of the thin, ragged line of soldiers standing between them and disaster. Eventually, the order to withdraw finally came. There was no victory announcement, no celebratory press release. The retreat was as quiet and anonymous as the battle itself, carried out under the cover of night. Bodies were buried hastily in shallow graves. Some were never found at all. When the surviving soldiers returned from the front, they expected something: questions, interviews, a small token of recognition. Instead, they were met with silence. The war had moved on. Bigger, more dramatic battles captured the headlines. Their valley and their sacrifice disappeared from the news and then from the history books. When the official war histories were written, their entire struggle was reduced to a single cold line: minor engagement. Strategic impact minimal. But for the veterans who had lived it, the impact was anything but minimal. Decades later, they could still remember the valley with perfect, haunting clarity. They remembered the sound of their boots sinking into the thick mud, the smell of gunpowder mixed with rain, and the face of the young soldier who shared his last cigarette with them and never stood up again. Every year, a few of them would gather, not at a grand national monument, but in a small community hall. They brought faded photographs, old letters, and medals they rarely wore. They didn't talk about grand strategy or tactics. They talked about names. "Do you remember Jackson?" one would ask. "Yeah," another would reply softly. He used to hum when he got nervous. They remembered the jokes they told under fire, the gnawing fear, and the incredible acts of courage that never made it into any official record. Some of them tried, over the years, to tell historians what had really happened. They wrote letters and gave a few interviews. But without a famous general or a dramatic, clear-cut victory, the story was often dismissed as unremarkable. That is, until one day, a young researcher, digging through an archive, stumbled upon an old, weather-beaten diary. It belonged to a private, not an officer, just an ordinary soldier who had written in it every single night during the battle. He described the relentless hunger, the bone-deep terror, and the unwavering determination to hold the line. He listed the names of the wounded and the dead, ensuring they wouldn't be forgotten. On the last page, he wrote, "If anyone ever reads this, know that we were here. And we did not run." That diary changed everything. Slowly, painstakingly, the truth began to emerge. Old documents were re-examined. Casualty numbers were corrected. It became clear that this minor battle had delayed the enemy's advance just long enough to prevent a much larger disaster elsewhere, saving thousands of lives. A new chapter was finally added to the history book's brief, but honest. When the handful of surviving veterans were invited to a small memorial unveiling in the valley, many of them wept. Not because they craved praise, but because, after a lifetime of silence, someone finally remembered. As the ceremony ended, one old man stood before the new stone monument, looking at the long list of engraved names. He reached out, his hand trembling, and gently touched one of them. He whispered, "You're not forgotten. History may overlook battles. Books may simplify sacrifice. But memory lives on in the hearts of those who were there, and in the quiet truth that some of the most important moments in our history happened when no one was watching. The veterans of that valley never forgot. And now neither will we." Thanks for watching.